Welcome back to Essentials, where we break down the forces shaping our world. I'm Carver Benson.
And I'm Carly Jensen. Today we're focusing on Trump's view of the world. We try to bring together all his policies.
From trade wars to culture wars, from Doge to NATO and tariffs, is Trump just chaotic, or is there a strategy behind everything he does?
What if it all fits into one worldview? One where the US has been drained for years, and Trump wants to reverse that trend, with tough words and fast action.
Today on Essentials, Trump's worldview, step by step, clear, concrete, and perhaps surprisingly logical and coherent. But we will remain critical. Let's start with the core. Carly, does Trump really have a well-thought-out worldview?
Yes, absolutely. In his eyes, everything is about deal-making. Countries aren't friends, they're competitors. International politics isn't a value struggle, but a series of transactions. Who wins the deal? Who pays the price?
That sounds logical, but isn't that too simplistic? What happens to international alliances like NATO or the UN? Don't they have value?
That's a great point. Trump sees these organizations more as a cost burden. He questions why the US pays the largest share for the security of other nations. However, this view does miss the benefits of multilateral cooperation, both economically and geopolitically. Some stuff just doesn't stop at the border, such as climate change, pandemics, or international terrorism.
And that's where a major criticism lies. His focus on transactions can create unnecessary tension with allies. Okay, let's get specific. What does Trump say about China?
China is Trump's primary adversary. He believes they got rich through unfair trade practices, a $419 billion trade surplus in 2018, and technology transfers without real reciprocity. He sees China as a threat, especially because they are using their wealth to build a modern military. Obviously, China can afford to spend annually $224 billion on their military.
But hasn't Trump himself helped build China in a way, by opening up markets for Chinese products in the US?
That's a valid point. Over the past few decades, the US has helped China grow by opening up trade.
You could say that the USA is financing the army of its biggest adversary.
Yes, so the question now is, how can you rebalance without triggering war? It's a delicate balance.
What about Europe, though? Trump often complains about NATO members' low defense spending. But if the US starts to withdraw from global politics, what happens to stability?
That's a criticism as well. The America First approach could lead to instability that ultimately harms the US. If Europe, for example, doesn't take on enough responsibility, it could create a vacuum where other powers, like Russia, could assert influence. Trump's idea of making NATO members more accountable is valid, but a hastily process of pulling back could create geopolitical risks.
Let's talk about high import tariffs. Trump has imposed tariffs on a wide range of countries, including China, the EU, Canada, and Mexico. Why these high tariffs?
Trump sees these tariffs as a tool to rebalance trade. He believes that other countries have been taking advantage of the US by running trade surpluses. At the heart of this crisis is a trade deficit in goods that has ballooned to more than $1 trillion annually. According to Trump, the economic models of free trade that predict chronic trade imbalances will always be eliminated through price adjustments via exchange rates are dead wrong.
I have read that he is angry that the U.S. cumulative trade deficits in goods from 1976 to 2024 have transferred over $20 trillion of American wealth into foreign hands. That's more than 60% of U.S. GDP in 2024. Foreign interests have taken over vast swaths of U.S. farmland, housing, tech companies, and even parts of our food supply.
The tariffs are his way of forcing those countries to negotiate fairer terms for the U.S. With China, for example, the goal was to force them to reduce their trade surplus with the U.S., protect intellectual property, and stop unfair practices like forced technology transfers.
But is this only about tariffs?
No, even worse than this is the barrage of non-tariff weapons foreign nations use to strangle American exports, unfairly boost their shipments to the U.S., and wall off their own markets. These tools include currency manipulation, value-added tax distortions, dumping, export subsidies, state-owned enterprises, IP theft, discriminatory product standards, quotas, bans, opaque licensing regimes, burdensome customs procedures, data localization mandates, and increasingly, the use of lawfare in places like the EU to target America's largest tech firms. On top of that, many foreign competitors operate from sweatshops and pollution havens that morally and environmentally stain the global landscape from Asia and Africa to Latin America.
But high tariffs often lead to retaliation, right? How does that fit into Trump's strategy?
That's true. Retaliation is a natural outcome, but Trump sees it as part of the negotiating process. The idea is that over time, countries will be forced to come to the table and agree to better terms. He's playing the long game, and tariffs are his tool for applying pressure. It's about putting America first and pushing for trade deals that benefit the U.S.
Doesn't this also hurt U.S. consumers, though? Higher prices on goods could backfire.
There's definitely a downside. It increases costs for American consumers, especially on products like electronics or machinery. But for Trump, this is a necessary sacrifice to protect American jobs and industries. The question is whether the benefits outweigh the costs, and that's something economists debate.
Let's turn to the role of large companies in Trump's vision. He's been very vocal about big corporations. Does he see them as allies or adversaries?
Trump sees large corporations as central to America's success, but only if they're playing by his rules. He's always been critical of companies that outsource jobs or avoid taxes through loopholes. Trump's vision is that American companies should focus on domestic growth, job creation, and investing in the American worker.
So his policies aim to protect these companies and force them to bring jobs back to the U.S.?
Exactly. The tariffs, tax cuts, and deregulation, all of these are aimed at incentivizing U.S. companies to expand at home, not abroad. The tax cuts in the 2017 tax reform were designed to encourage companies to bring back their profits held overseas. He wants to rebuild the manufacturing sector and bring back the kind of jobs that were lost during the rise of globalism.
But large corporations often have a lot of power. Couldn't they use this influence to push back against Trump's policies?
Absolutely. Large companies have significant influence over policy, and they've often lobbied against Trump's tariffs and tax policies. The question is whether the pressure of the market and American consumer demand can outweigh the influence of big corporations that want to continue outsourcing and lowering labor costs.
Interestingly, Trump is tough on China, tough on the EU, but he seems very reluctant to take a hard line on Russia. Why is that?
For Trump, Russia isn't a strategic threat like China. He views Russia more as a regional player, not a global superpower. It's all about balancing geopolitical power. He's also said, if Russia is a problem for Europe, Europe should handle it. He doesn't want the US to act as the global policeman anymore.
But isn't that dangerous? If you leave Russia unchecked, it can exert influence over Europe and former Soviet states.
That's certainly a criticism. Sometimes it seems like Trump is willing to make concessions to authoritarian regimes for his own interests. This could have long-term consequences, especially for European stability.
And how do all these cultural issues fit into his agenda? Things like anti-woke, anti-trans, and Doge.
Trump's aversion to woke culture is primarily a rejection of identity politics, which he believes undermines American culture. But he doesn't always understand that for many people, identity politics is a way to fight for social justice.
That's a point of criticism. His hard stance often deepens polarization. Not everyone feels represented by the traditional values he promotes.
Exactly. And then there's Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency led by Elon Musk. The idea is to make the government more efficient, eliminating unnecessary bureaucracy, streamlining decision-making, and simple cost-cutting. It sounds good, but implementing this could be tricky.
There's always the question, is this really benefiting citizens? Or is it just about efficiently executing Trump's plans? Finally, why does he do everything in such an aggressive and fast manner?
Trump believes that you don't gain influence through politeness. He uses chaos deliberately as a strategy. He overwhelms and tries to get his opponents out of balance, dominates the news cycle, and forces his opponents onto the defensive. Speed helps him outmaneuver the bureaucracy. He tweets something, and within 24 hours, it's policy.
But can't such an approach lead to bad decisions without enough time for proper reflection or evaluation?
That's a valid point. His fast decisions aren't always well thought out. They can sometimes lead to negative long-term consequences because they don't have the time for thorough analysis.
So Carly, to sum up, what is Trump's worldview?
The world isn't a community, it's a negotiation table, and the US has to stop losing. But there are some significant criticisms, especially when it comes to stability and long-term consequences.
Whether you agree with him or not, it's clear that there's a plan behind the style. And at least he is trying to change things, although he is taking a lot of risks.
Found this interesting? Leave a like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments what you think about Trump's worldview.
See you next time on Essentials.
Bye.